G.K. Chesterton said two things that are very definitive of what I'm about to say to you. Chesterton said, whenever you remove any fence, always pause long enough to ask why it was put there in the first place. Why were these protective barriers erected? What was the reason behind it? And then he went on to say the tragedy of disbelieving in God is not that a person ends up believing in nothing. Alas, it is much worse. A person may end up believing in anything. The tragedy of disbelieving in God is not that a person ends up believing in nothing. Alas, it is much worse. He may end up believing in anything. What he's really saying is, if there's no point of reference for an absolute, relativism can ultimately wreak havoc because all of the markers are changing all of the time. And you really have no guideposts to lead you into the way that is right. These are sobering reminders for a nation as great as ours, facing enormous challenges in every direction to try to redefine who we are or what we actually believe. And he who refuses to learn from history is forced to repeat his mistakes. So here he was, he decided to lead a reaction against his father's Reformation. What then happened? What not naturally happens in an event like that, it accelerates the development of all kind of aberrant and variant beliefs. When the fence is removed, when the absolute is taken away. You know the old story about the man who used to go to work every morning, stop outside a clockmaker store in Leicestershire, England, go to a factory, stop, adjust his watch with the clock outside, go on to his place of work, and one day the clockmaker stepped down and said, what you doing this every day? You stop outside my shop, you look at my clock, you set your watch, and you walk away. What kind of work do you do? He said, I'm embarrassed to tell you this, I'm the timekeeper in the factory nearby that rings the bell at 4 o'clock every afternoon at the end of the day's work, and my watch doesn't work very well, so I synchronize it with your clock outside your store each morning. Clockmaker says, you're not going to believe this either. My clock doesn't work very well, and I synchronize it with the bell that I hear from the factory. When two wrong clocks are adjusting themselves by each other, pardon the English, it's going to get wronger and wronger. That's the way it's going to go. And so after he led a reaction, he accelerated the development of heathenism. And what happened is remarkable in history. If you actually go back to the land of Israel today, the mark of Manasseh has been left because Manasseh did what he did in the valley of Hinnom. It was named after Manasseh's time. Why was it called the valley of Hinnom? Manasseh introduced child sacrifice into the land, offered his own children into the flaming arms of the burning idols, and their yells and screams could be heard. Notice what a historian says. Nighttime seems to have been the special time for these awful immolations. The yells of the children bound to the altars, rolling into the fire from the brazen arms of the idol, the shouts and hymns of the frantic crowds, and the wild tumult of drums and shrill instruments by which the cries of the victims were sought to be drowned. It rose in awful discordance over the city, forming with the whole scene, visible from the walls by the glow of the furnaces and flames, such an ideal of transcendent horror that the name of the valley became then and still continues in the form of what it is today, the word for Gehenna, the usual word for hell. That's where the name comes, the valley of Hinnom. It reminded people what hell probably felt like. The amber-colored sky, the shrills of children screaming, and all done with some great pompous religiosity and so forth. He made a remarkable choice in three directions. The reaction against his father's Reformation, accelerated the development of variant beliefs, and what was the third result? He instituted a bitter persecution of the prophets. That's the logical outworking. When you turn your back upon the way that God has for you or for me, what option do we have but to persecute those who stand and remind us of the error of our ways? That's what happened. Isaiah was the one that Manasseh killed. Isaiah went and hid inside the hollow trunk of a tree, and in the book of Hebrews it tells us some of them were sawn asunder. That's exactly what happened to Isaiah under Manasseh's rule, as a saw was put to the tree. This was the man who was talking to us, how unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. This was the prophetic voice of hope and redemption that Manasseh silenced. Ramifications, three. Number one, hard to believe it is possible for one person to lead millions into untold evil. Possible to happen. You know, as a young man, when I was first starting out, I remember my life was quite radically transformed. I was only in my mid-20s, studying in Toronto, Canada, when I moved from India shortly before that. And I was invited to Vietnam by many of the chaplains and covered the length and breadth of the country, all the way from Vũng Tàu in the south through Saigon, Da Nang, Pleiku, and all of that to Quang Tri in the north, the demilitarized zone. I remember sitting outside the home one day, watching that amber-colored sky and all the firepower that was being unleashed, feeling my life being changed, watching reality at work, how it shaped my own thinking and moved me into the direction to try and be a light in the dark world. But nothing changed me as much as in the 1980s when I was invited by the universities in Warsaw and Krakow and all to deliver some talks during the Cold War. One day my host said, "Have you ever been to a death camp?" I said, "Yeah, I've been to Buchenwald, Dachau." He said, "No, those are concentration camps. Have you been to a death camp?" I said, "I don't believe so." He said, "Tomorrow we're free, I'm going to drive you." He drove me over to Auschwitz. Cold, bleak, foggy day, winter. I wasn't prepared emotionally for what I was going to see. If any one of you has been there, you know what I'm speaking of. You cannot walk out of that building unchanged. You see in one room behind glass 12,000 pounds of women's hair as the women were shaven before they were sent into those gas ovens there, and that hair then was then woven into bags and sold in the marketplace. In Auschwitz alone, they were being obliterated at the rate of 12,000 every day. And the room that really shakes you down completely is to watch the room with children's little suitcases and toothbrushes and bags, again behind glass. So the pictures of these twins looking totally emaciated, experimented upon by Joseph Mengele. Castrated there in that picture, and Mengele doing his experiments. Mengele just passed away fairly recently, hiding somewhere in Argentina. As I stood and looked at that, I thought to myself, how can this be? What has a human being done to himself or herself in order to be able to do this with such a plum, all supposedly for the betterment of the Übermensch, the Superman? Outside the gas ovens were the words of Adolf Hitler, "I want to raise a generation of young people devoid of a conscience, imperious, relentless, and cruel." He nearly succeeded. He nearly succeeded. You see, what you actually do is to find out that whether it's a Hitler type or a Stalin type. When I spoke to the Center for Geopolitical Strategy in Moscow, I sat surrounded by atheists, tall atheists on the faculty. And they asked me to speak on the theme of ethics and God and so on. And I remember when one of them asked a hostile question, I leaned over, I said to one of them, I said, "You know, the man who obliterated 15 million of you was once upon a time a seminary student. He turned his back upon God. And the last physical act of Joseph Stalin, Svetlana testified, was that Stalin clenched his fist over the heavens one more time, threw his head back on the pillow, and he was gone." I said, "You know what, if somebody asked him, how long do you expect to torture your people and expect them to keep following you?" Stalin's answer was very crisp. He called for a chicken, took a piece of bread, but first he defeathered the chicken, denuded it, walked away, and then the chicken hobbled over towards him, and Stalin had the bread in his hand, bent down, and the chicken first nuzzled between his trouser legs to find warmth, and then pecked away in his hand for the bread. Stalin said, "You have your answer, man. You asked me how long do I expect to torture my own people and expect them to be following me? You had your answer. I tortured that chicken and it will follow me for food the rest of its life. People are like that chicken. You torture them and they will follow you for food the rest of their lives." I said, "What do you have to say to that?" The general who invited me in my wife's presence, his lips started to quiver, the tears started to run down his face. I had the privilege of seeing that military general, the head of the historical faculty in that prestigious institution, bow his head and surrender his life to the love of Christ, even as he asked forgiveness for perpetrating ideas that had cost his own people so much.